Hey guys, it's Celestia, and today we're finally going to talk about unsolicited criticism in the art community, largely but not exclusively in the online part of the community. It's a topic I've mentioned offhandedly in at least 3 other videos because it's deeply intertwined with a lot of different art-related issues, but it's not something I've taken enough time to directly and dedicatedly address in its own video, which I have been promising to do for a while now. So here we are, it's about time. We'll go over what unsolicited criticism actually is, why it's a problem, why people do it, and whether or not it's ever actually justifiable or helpful, at least in my opinion. But before we do, let me take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Wingfox. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you've heard me gush about Wingfox before. They're an online learning platform specifically dedicated to all forms of art, and they pretty much have an in-depth course available from a skilled industry professional for any aspect or medium of art that you could possibly want to learn or improve on. I've taken many of their courses myself in the past, and this month they let me try out 2, one teaching character illustration and one teaching stylized natural background painting. Both of those are the main focuses of most of my work, and subsequently also what I want to improve on the most, and having the opportunity to try out these courses was immensely helpful to me. Combined, both courses offered over 70 hours of video-based education, and because it's organized into chapters, it's easy to not just consume all that content at once, but also skip to the parts that you want to focus on most at any given moment and learn at your own pace. They're currently doing a Black Friday sale, which means you can take either of those courses for 30% off with coupon code BFCM via the links in the description, or get both as a bundle like I did for only $58. Please check them out because honestly, I've never taken a course on their platform that I wouldn't recommend, and I've always seen improvement in my work as a result of them. Thank you so much to Wingfox for sponsoring this video, and don't forget to save on your art education with the links in the description and coupon code BFCM. Anyway, all that aside, let's get into the video. Before we really start getting into the more controversial details of unsolicited critique or criticism, I want to make it as clear as possible what it is and what it isn't, because I don't want to unintentionally diminish the value of all critique by criticizing the unsolicited kind. Constructive criticism is an unbelievably valuable tool for any artist trying to grow and improve their skills, and some even argue that it's impossible to reach your full potential as an artist without it. When it's offered correctly, respectfully, and most importantly, at the artist's request, it is, in my opinion, one of the absolute best ways to learn and improve your work. And it's something that a lot of artists value so much that they pay for it. There are individual art mentorships, services like Jing Sketch's art clinics, channels that will fix the art of subscribers who submit it to show them how to fix their mistakes. And actually, I don't know if this is still a thing, but back in my day, DeviantArt used to offer a seeking critique option for core members to opt into if they wanted, which would mark that deviation as, well, seeking critique, at which point people could offer that critique in a separate section of the comments. My point is that there's a reason there are so many ways to seek and receive constructive criticism for your art, and it's because it's really, really helpful. And by no means do I want to suggest otherwise with this video. The only thing I intend to criticize is when that critique is offered to artists who either haven't asked for it or have even explicitly said that they're not open to it, otherwise known as unsolicited critique. Obviously, you can probably gather from everything I've said so far and the fact that I'm making a video about it that I don't support unsolicited critique, and I don't think it's ever justifiable. But a lot of people genuinely do. So in an effort to better understand what motivates them to not only give it, but feel justified doing so, I spoke to multiple artists who expressed that opinion and got their perspectives on it. And while it hasn't changed my personal opinion, I can see where they're coming from, and it's been helpful and educational to hear the other side of this from people who are legitimately well-meaning. So throughout the video, I'm going to explain the problems arising from unsolicited criticism, the most common reasons that people have for offering it anyway, and why I still believe that there is never an acceptable reason to do so. I can't stress enough that that's a conclusion based exclusively on my own opinions, because at this point, it's starting to feel like all of my videos start with me saying, it's my opinion, and then all of the comments start with everyone bashing me for being objectively wrong and basically saying, yeah, that statement won't stop me because I can't read. These are just my takes on this, and while I do hope to present them with as much objectivity and as little bias as I can, you're still more than welcome to disagree with me, and I am not claiming to be empirically correct. Opinion disclaimer aside, let's start with the reasons that people don't like unsolicited critique and the ways that it can actually end up hurting the artist receiving it. The first is that more often than not, unsolicited criticisms just end up being thinly veiled insults towards the artist's work rather than constructive feedback, using the guise of critique to justify effectively shitting on art. The people leaving these comments are rarely explaining what's actually wrong with the artist's piece and how they can fix it and improve in the future, but are instead usually just saying, you're bad at this thing, or even, your art is bad altogether. I've received my share of unsolicited criticism on this channel thumbnail that falls into this category, and it has varied from a respectful but unhelpful, just some constructive criticism, you're bad at this thing, to the ridiculously passive-aggressive example in the thumbnail, which is real. Your art is so stiff and not lively with weird anatomy, cat face, just letting you know, to even just straight up saying your faces are shit, or things along those lines. Some of them were probably legitimately well-meaning. Some of them were probably just trying to insult me under the guise of giving me helpful feedback, and some of them might have been somewhere in between. But the bottom line is that even if I had asked for these comments, none of them were actually offering critique. Proper critique isn't saying your anatomy sucks. It's saying the way you drew the subject's arm at that angle is inaccurate. Here's how to draw it accurately and some methods of study that will help you improve your anatomy in the future and help you avoid making similar mistakes. If your comment on an artist's work doesn't actually give them any constructive information on how to fix the mistake that you're criticizing, you're not giving them critique. You're just pointing out a flaw for the sake of pointing out a flaw. I know I suck at faces, and the commenter literally just telling me that didn't help me get any better at them. It just made me feel even shittier about sucking at them. The actual art critic that recently gave me proper critique last month and suggested that I start studying the Loomis head method and exaggerating facial features only after ensuring that they have the correct proportions and shapes actually helped me improve. And one of the biggest problems with unsolicited critique as of late is that that difference is not acknowledged, and people treat commenting, "This part of your art sucks," as if it's as valuable and helpful as commenting, "Here's how to improve this part of your art." I've seen a lot of people say that when they were first joining the art community, unsolicited critique was never viewed as a problem, and that people used to be happy to receive constructive criticism even when they didn't ask for it because it was helpful. And that actually was the case for me too when I first joined, back in the early days of DeviantArt when that was a pretty normal thing to do. And I hear a lot of people say that the reason it's now viewed as bad or controversial is because artists these days are too sensitive and unwilling to hear anything other than compliments and positivity, which is, to an extent, probably partially the case. The culture has definitely shifted away from constructive honesty towards uplifting but ultimately unhelpful echo chambers of compliments, and I fully acknowledge how frustrating and counterproductive that can feel. But I also think that the recently rising distaste for unsolicited critique is because unsolicited critique itself isn't what it used to be when it was normalized. I remember back in my early DeviantArt days, all of the unsolicited critique I ever received was helpful. It hurt sometimes to receive it without asking when I was really hoping someone would comment something nice about my art instead, but I don't ever remember receiving a comment of unsolicited critique back then that wasn't both respectful and legitimately valuable and useful, with information and advice that I was able to use to improve my art. These days, I don't actually remember the last time any of the unsolicited criticism I've received contained anything constructive or helpful. It's pretty much exclusively been "art bad, you suck," in more words. So yes, I think that to some extent the reason unsolicited critique is being more widely denounced is partially because artists are more sensitive and less open to it now. But I also think it's because the critique people are offering isn't really critique anymore. So it's less of artists saying, "I don't want to hear anything bad about my art ever," and more of artists saying, "I don't want you to take a shit on my art and leave," under the guise of offering me valuable feedback. I'm not saying that I think unsolicited critique is fine even if it is respectful, constructive, and useful, but I am saying that I think part of the reason it's so much more controversial than it used to be is because the critique even being respectful, constructive, and useful is no longer even the bare minimum. In fact, it's a rarity. And not only that, but the artists offering the so-called critique are often nowhere near skilled enough themselves to be qualified to do so, leading them to frequently make criticisms that are inaccurate, wrong, or at least misguided. If the artist giving the feedback isn't good enough or at least educated enough at art to do so correctly, the most common resulting problem I've seen is that they'll criticize intentional stylistic choices as being incorrect based on the proportions of realism or semi-realism, if that's the style that they're familiar with. Or sometimes even the opposite, where they'll criticize the proportions of realism and semi-realism if their own style is more exaggerated and they aren't practiced enough to know that those proportions aren't accurate in reality. Regardless of why, the bottom line is that the quality of critique has pretty severely declined in recent years, both in intention and actual content. But even if the critique is good, respectful, correct, and constructive, there are still a lot of valid reasons that artists don't like that either. And the first is that in most cases, there's a reason they didn't ask for it or seek it out. And yes, sometimes that reason is that they're too sensitive and that hearing critical feedback on their work just isn't something they're ready for or comfortable with yet. And I mean, why is that a bad thing? Yes, I understand the frustration with the growing trend of art communities being echo chambers of positivity with no room for the critique necessary for artists in them to grow and improve. But if you don't like that dynamic, don't be a part of it. There are still many art communities in which critique is very valued and encouraged. And if that's the kind of environment that you'd prefer to be in, then go be in it. No one's stopping you. But artists who don't want that kind of environment have just as much of a right to feel that way, regardless of what you think about it. And whether it's helpful to their growth as artists or not, they should have a right to feel comfortable and safe in their circles of positivity within the art community, without critics coming in and forcing them to hear feedback they didn't want. Because whether you think they should grow thicker skin or not is pretty much completely irrelevant. What is relevant is that if a sensitive artist with low self-esteem says they aren't open to critique because they're not confident enough to handle it or benefit from it, then offering it anyway is not helpful to them. More often than not, all it'll do is hurt them, make them feel even more insecure, make them feel uncomfortable in the community, and even potentially discourage them from pursuing art altogether. Even if what you're telling them is something they need to hear in order to grow, it's useless to them if they aren't in the right mental place to utilize it. Immediately writing an artist off as a special snowflake that needs to grow up because they're too sensitive to properly accept and grow from critique is pretty much immediately going to alienate most beginner artists and artists with mental health issues and reduce all of their legitimate concerns and anxieties to just them being babies, and that's really not cool. Regardless of whether or not you think an artist should be able to handle critique, if they say they can't and you give it to them anyway, you're not doing it to help them. You're doing it because you want to, even though you know it won't. And that's a very good reason that a lot of artists have to really, really dislike the concept of unsolicited critique. Others, though, just straight up don't want it. They're not too sensitive to handle it, they just don't see any value in it because they're not trying to improve. That's one thing that I've always found to be so ridiculously arrogant about people who offer unsolicited critique. The assumption that the person they're offering it to is actively trying to grow as an artist and wants your advice on how to do so. I would hazard a guess that in all likelihood, the majority of artists who share their work online aren't doing it because they're trying to make it their career or livelihood, but rather because they're making art as a hobby and they want to share it with other people who also like either art or the subject matter that they're drawing. They're not all out here trying to get better or develop a proper study plan for optimal improvement. They're enjoying a pastime they like for fun because they enjoy it. And in those cases, they just don't care about your critique, and that's fair. Why should they be subjected to your opinions on how they could make their art better when they don't want to make it better? They just want to make it. In this case, unsolicited critique isn't necessarily harmful, but it's certainly irritating to the artist and pretty much completely pointless for the critic, because the artist has no interest in what they're saying and no intention of implementing it constructively. So why waste your own time just to piss someone else off and have them ignore you anyway? But those are the main problems that people have with unsolicited criticism. I'm sure there are more that I didn't mention, which you guys are more than encouraged to share in the comments, but those are the ones that I hear mentioned the most. And now that we've established those, let's talk about the reasons other artists have for still choosing to give and justify unsolicited critique anyway, as well as my reasons for disagreeing, because there are quite a few on both ends, and again, while I may not agree with them, I absolutely still find them thought-provoking and worth discussing. The first person I heard from said that in their opinion, even hobbyists should want to improve their art to some extent, otherwise they're just wasting their own time, and that both hobbyists and beginners are in need of critique more than any other group, and should therefore be more open to receiving it than anyone else. They believe that it's human nature to give advice and criticism and point out when something is wrong, and that if artists can't handle that, they shouldn't be posting their work online at all. I personally found this to be very presumptuous and bold, and not bold in a good way. I don't think it's anyone's right to say whether or not an artist is wasting their time with their work because they don't care to improve it. Because as far as I'm concerned, if an artist enjoys the time they spend drawing, it's not a waste, whether they've improved or not. And effectively saying that you're only not wasting your time as an artist if you're trying to grow is just weirdly gatekeepy of the value of someone else's time, effort, and art. Like, I don't play League of Legends to try to get to Challenger and start my illustrious new esports career. I play League of Legends to fucking suck at it and have a good time doing so. I want to play Kindred ADC and Misfortune top and have a fun night losing at both. I shouldn't be expected to be trying to become a better player with every single game and use every match as a learning experience to improve if gaming is just something I do to wind down and not something I ever want to pursue professionally. And I don't see how it's any different for artists who only use art as something to do to wind down as a hobby either. I think a lot of this perspective comes down to the weird culture in the art community surrounding the glorification of doing art professionally and the comparative tendency to look down on artists who don't want to make art their job or improve their skills, which is something I've never understood and still don't now. I certainly don't think it's a reason to justify forcing unsolicited critique on artists, even if your intention is to help those you think need improvement the most. And the claim that artists shouldn't post their work online if they don't want criticism on it brings me to the next opinion I heard a lot of, that unsolicited critique is never really unsolicited because by posting your art online, you are soliciting feedback. People who feel this way believe that the very act of sharing one's art in a public place invites the public to comment on it with whatever thoughts and opinions they may have. And if the artist doesn't want those opinions, they shouldn't post their art at all. And I can at least understand where this point is coming from, even if I do also find it a little arrogant or at least misguided, because posting any anything online does come with the knowledge that people will not only see it, but have the right and ability to share their comments on it. It's naive to think that posting something on the internet will result in no one having anything negative or critical to say about it, or that you can or even should be able to stop them from saying so. I completely agree that if you as an artist are too sensitive to be able to ignore and move past feedback that you didn't ask for, you probably shouldn't post your work online, because the one thing you can count on the internet is that people will be assholes, and they will always share their asshole opinions with you. But that said, there's a very big difference between saying you should be prepared for comments on your art that might be hurtful or unwanted, versus saying posting your art at all means you're asking for these comments and should therefore find them helpful and not complain about them. The former is just good sense, whereas the latter makes a huge baseless assumption about the artist that is often untrue, that they shared their art because they wanted feedback, positive or negative. Posting art publicly means two things for sure: that the artist wants the public to see it, and that they're aware that the public has the ability to comment on it. It does not mean that they want the public's critical feedback on it, that they want any feedback at all on it, or that they're looking to utilize feedback to improve. Tons of artists are only sharing their work online because they love art and want to show theirs to other people who also love art or the thing they're making art of, because sharing their passion with others gives it meaning and value to them. It is so arrogant to assume that the only reason an artist would or should ever post their art online is because they want your thoughts on it, or would even find them valuable in the first place. And the idea that because they posted it online and you can say anything you want about it, you should, and they should find that valuable, is just so flawed. You can do a lot of things on the internet that you shouldn't do, and other people have a right to find it rude and disrespectful that you decided to give your unwanted opinions on their work just because you could. If I bake a cake that I'm proud of and I decide to share a picture of it online, it's not because I want your opinion on whether or not you think my use of icing and fondant was adequate. Just because posting art online opens it up to public feedback doesn't mean that public feedback is automatically welcome. And while you're obviously free to give it anyway, the artist is also free to find that rude, ignore it, criticize you in return, or block you. And if your intention is truly to help them, then listen to them when they tell you what they do and don't find helpful. Another very related opinion that I heard was from someone who believed that the default standard on the internet is that if you post your art there, you are open to feedback, and it should be assumed that you are unless you openly state otherwise. The implication here was still that if the artist did explicitly state that they weren't open to feedback, that boundary should still be respected. So I can kind of understand and sympathize with this opinion. Personally, I think it's more respectful to just assume that artists aren't open to criticism unless they openly state otherwise, as it's just a safer, more reliable way to avoid hurting anyone and ensure that you're only offering feedback to those who really want it. But I can understand the mentality of assuming that sharing your work without a disclaimer saying you don't want feedback could imply that you're open to it. And while I don't necessarily agree with this perspective, I don't think it's deliberately harmful or ill-intentioned, and I think it's a fair view on it, even if it's not one that I share. Finally, the last opinion I heard a lot of was that artists can't grow without critique, and that if an artist is never open to critique, the only way they'll ever be able to improve is if someone gives it to them anyway and tells them what they quote-unquote need to hear. And in fairness, I can see where this opinion comes from, too. I've heard from many artists that some of the most pivotal moments in their artistic journeys came from the constructive criticism and advice of strangers on the internet whose input they didn't ask for. And even when it came out of nowhere and hurt their feelings and their pride, it helped them improve in a way that they never would have been able to without it. Others have also agreed that they personally never would have felt confident enough to say that they were open to or seeking critique, and that if someone hadn't given it to them anyway, they never would have received the feedback that they needed in order to identify the problems in their work in need of fixing. And I'm actually in the same boat with that. In my early years as an artist, some of the most valuable feedback I received was from strangers on DeviantArt that I didn't ask because I never would have had the confidence to. And I grew much more as an artist because of the advice they offered me. So I completely understand the reasoning behind this belief, and to an extent, I even share it. But I share it in the way that I also believe that while tough love is what some people need to get stronger, others will be broken and torn down by it instead. So giving it to everyone and expecting everyone to respond positively to it is probably not going to be the helpful and constructive experience you intend it to be. Yes, there are many artists who could benefit from unsolicited feedback because they needed to hear that advice and may never otherwise have had the courage to ask for it or utilize it. But there are also a lot of artists that could receive that feedback and be so utterly crushed by it that they could stop making art altogether. So to me, what it comes down to is that on one hand, you could share your unsolicited criticism and potentially help some artists while really hurting a lot of others, or you could keep it to yourself and potentially be less helpful to some artists but hurt absolutely zero others. And I would personally prefer to be slightly less helpful and not at all harmful than more helpful but also more harmful. But I do understand the other side of that, and I can strongly sympathize with it as someone who has grown from unsolicited criticism myself. Still though, I also believe that an artist's improvement is their own business. Worst case scenario, by not giving them your input, you've stopped them from improving on an aspect of their art that they may have otherwise been able to improve on. But it's not your place, in my opinion, to look at an artist and decide it's worth hurting them to make them improve. Only they can decide whether or not that's worth it, and I personally think that if they do decide it's worth it, they'll ask for it, and if they don't, it's their own business if they don't improve as a result. It doesn't harm you in any way for that artist to go about their life and work without improving, and if their growth stagnates because they're not open to critique, that is no one's problem but their own. Their artistic growth is not your responsibility. Ultimately, hearing all of these different opinions was honestly a genuinely helpful experience for me, and while my opinion on the matter hasn't changed, I do feel more sympathetic and understanding towards those who don't share it now that I've more thoroughly explored why they don't. Personally, I still believe that there's almost no instance in which it's appropriate to give unsolicited critique on an artist's work without asking if they're open to receiving it, simply because just asking first would literally solve any potential problem that could arise from it. Like, in my opinion, giving critique without asking an artist if they're okay with it will only achieve one of three results. 1, they don't want it and ignore you, and you've wasted your own time. 2, they find it hurtful, and your input is actually subsequently detrimental to their artistic growth. Or 3, whether they were open to it or not, they did find it helpful and were able to utilize it constructively in their work. Yes, one of those outcomes is good, but by just asking the artist first if they were open to it, that one good outcome could still have been achieved, but the 2 bad outcomes could have been avoided. And if that's the case, then why open the door to any bad outcomes at all when asking ensures only good ones? But again, for the millionth time, that's just me. I know many of you might disagree, and that's completely fine. I think I understand why more now too. But if I can't convince those of you who disagree not to give unsolicited critique, I at least want to encourage you to please do so as respectfully as you possibly can, and not to artists who have explicitly requested not to receive it. And if you are giving unsolicited critique, try to consider whether or not you'd actually say what you're saying to the artist's face if you were talking to them in person. I feel like the problem with a lot of unsolicited critique in recent years is that the anonymity provided by the internet allows people to feel way too comfortable being way too mean, because they don't have to consider the human consequence of their words. They don't see the person on the other side of the screen, so they don't have to think about them as a real person at all. And they're subsequently much more cruel than they would be if they were really talking to them. So if you wouldn't feel comfortable giving an artist this criticism to their face, or at least in the manner that you're planning to, don't say it online. Because if you think it would be too harsh or hurtful to say to their face, it would absolutely be too harsh and hurtful for them to hear online. It's just that you don't have to feel personally accountable for that, because you don't see how they respond and they don't know who you are. But I think I've rambled enough for this week, so I'll end it there. Please let me know what you guys think about this in the comments, because every time I talk about this issue, I get another comment from another person with a brand new perspective I hadn't considered. So I think an open dialogue surrounding this topic in particular, in good faith, is especially valuable, at least for me. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Special thank you as always to channel members Cafe Soleil, Joseph Solomon, Unknown Code, and Abyss Reborn, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, This Is Totally My Name, Unity, Cora Fear, Jamisha Walker, Shirome Artiste, Elangshi, Soul Crystal, Kim Yen, Stony Cobra 13, and Shamil Sheep for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.